Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you are going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they will see the light of the world. Those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them." After this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him."
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to him and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came there with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?"
May God bless the reading of the word this morning. When my oldest daughter was married, I had a role to play in the wedding, but I wasn't the person walking her down the aisle. I was the person on the front row holding a video camera and videotaping the wedding. My aunt was very upset because her stepfather had walked her down the aisle. And my aunt didn't think that that was appropriate. She thought that I should have done that. And so my aunt, who loves me very, very much, if you're ever around my Aunt Mary Lee, don't say anything bad about me, because you'll have a fight on your hands. She doesn't believe any of those things, true as they are. Or perhaps she does and she forgives them. Well, I had to calm her down that day, and I had to tell her, Aunt Marilee, it is right. You see, if you don't know my entire story, one thing you need to know about me is that I have not been very good at marriage. And in my mind, the biggest failure in my life is as a parent. If I could go back, you know that. If you could go back, if I could go back, the one thing I would try to do better, that I would hope to do better, would be to be a better father to my children. And see, I have 2 older children from a first marriage that live in East Tennessee. And they moved there in 1982. And I've spent every year since then paying visits and being the best uncle you can be. You can't be a good father from 1,000 miles away, at least not the way that we want to be. And so I had to tell my aunt, it is right. Her stepfather, since she was 5 or 6 years old, has been there to coach basketball games and softball games and t-ball games, and he's been there for cheerleading tryouts, and he's been there to console her when things didn't go well. He's been there to patch up her little bruises and skinned knees, and he's carried insurance policies and made sure she had the finest of health care, her and her sister both. So for me, the right place to be on that day, as painful as it was on the front row holding a video camera, and probably grateful that I could be there at all. Years later, I was speaking with a man about what God thinks about certain things, and we had the audacity and the boldness that day to believe that we knew what God thought about things. And I played it safe. I did what a good 3 on the Enneagram would do, or anyone in the heart space. I went right for my shame and right for my guilt. And I said, God, I know that you hate divorce because I do terrible things to people. I've hurt my ex-wife. I have hurt my children. And God, the children are so innocent that I know that that's why you hate divorce, because innocent people get hurt. Do you see the shame and the guilt I'm piling on myself so that I might understand the heart and the mind of God? And let me tell you how misled that was. Because in the next moment, God touched my heart in a very special way. I think God spoke to me. You will have to decide for yourself whether I'm right. But in that moment, I heard God say to me, the reason I hate divorce is because it hurts you. I wanted God to defend my children, condemn me, and make me feel better about the whole thing. And God wanted me to know that the day that I was running that video camera on the front row of that church, God was with me, holding me very close and suffering with me, because this is what God said: you would be a heartless, cruel person if that moment had not hurt. If you had not felt the pain of separation, and if you had not felt the pain of your failures, that moment would have made me heartless. It's like God knows that some things in this life just have to be painful. And what we say to God is, take it away. Take it away. Take away the sickness. Take away this pain. Take away hurricanes. Take away everything that makes us say, where was God? Take it away. When Isaiah in the 53rd chapter says that it pleased God to bruise the servant, Hebrew scholars interpret that as saying that the brokenness of Israel brought Israel back to an understanding of being God's children, God's chosen people. And so that it was good for Israel to suffer exile and to suffer loss. When New Testament authors and scholars and Christians like us read that text through a New Testament lens, we read it to say that it pleased God to bruise Jesus for the benefit of each of us, every believer. But at least one scholar says that God still bruises servants. You see, I know 2 people in the last month who have been diagnosed with shingles. Now, shingles is the chicken pox virus, and if you've had chicken pox, it doesn't hurt. It itches a lot. But shingles, which don't even look as nasty as chicken pox, it looks like just a little rash, is one of the most painful things that you can endure. And if you've never had shingles, you don't know that. But I've had shingles. And so when I was around these 2 people in the last couple of weeks who were suffering from shingles, I was moved to great compassion. I understood not to bump into them or even create a breeze near the place that was affected. Shingles hurt. And if you, again, haven't had it, you may not know. But how many of us know the pain of loss? You see, after experiencing the death of a person close to you, it's easier to have compassion for people who have lost someone. After experiencing loss in your own life, it's easier to have compassion for someone else who's going through a time of suffering. As a matter of fact, if we had not experienced some suffering of our own, we would not have the slightest idea what compassion should look like. Richard Rohr says it this way, that pain and suffering and loss are the only things strong enough to get the full attention of your ego. Can I say that again? Pain and suffering and loss are the only things that will get your attention. The only things that will make you say, maybe I don't understand the mind of God just exactly like I thought I do. Maybe I am not the most important person in the universe. Maybe my agenda is not the only agenda. A friend of mine wrote a song one time that said, I'm glad I'm not Jesus, bearing the sins of the world and turning water into wine, because if I was Jesus, I'm pretty sure I'd stay drunk all the time. I'm glad I'm not Jesus. You know, I attended a funeral this week with John and Peggy McConnell as they said goodbye to Peggy's mother, Inez McFall. And it was a beautiful place to be because Sean stood up and spoke beautiful words of life into a situation of loss and suffering and death. And Jesus was present. And then they buried Inez, and no one shouted at the coffin. It was almost like, Martha saying, oh, if only Jesus had been here. Because, see, if I was Jesus, I probably would have been tempted to raise Inez from the grave. If I were Jesus, my grandmother would be well over 100 years old right now and probably begging me to let her go. If only Jesus were here. But if you're a believer, there's a certain absurdity in that statement, isn't there? Because Jesus is here today. And Jesus was there under that awning at the cemetery on Monday. And Jesus is wherever 2 or more are gathered. And Jesus is wherever one serves. And Jesus is wherever there is life and wherever there is beauty and wherever there is truth. There is Jesus. And yet, we are unable to perform this miracle. But if you read that passage very closely, if Jesus knows that he is going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and he even tells the disciples on the way there, don't worry about it, he's fallen asleep, he has died, but it's so that you will understand God's glory in just a moment, in just a day, in just the minute we get there, in just the face of finality and irreversible circumstances, and in the face of the greatest struggle that we have, death, the thing that we cannot fix. Don't worry, I'm going to show you the power of God. And if Jesus knew all of that, then verse 35 is odd. Jesus knows what's about to happen, and yet he takes the time to weep and to mourn with the family. Maybe we can say, if Jesus had been there, someone would have wept with me. If Jesus had been there, someone would have cried with me. Someone would have held my pain and understood my suffering. You see, when we cry to God, why don't you fix it? Why don't you take it away? Where are you when these terrible things happen? We want God's response to be, no more of this. No more. No more floods. No more hurricanes. No more earthquakes. No more AIDS. No more cancer. No more death. And God chooses a very odd way of dealing with our suffering. Rather than reversing everything and stopping it, God enters into the suffering, so that we might understand and have compassion for others. God is graceful enough, gracious enough to us, not to give us everything that we ask for. There's a beautiful piece at the end of this that says, when Jesus calls Lazarus from the tomb and Lazarus stumbles out wrapped up in grave clothes, and, I have a picture in my mind of the mummy, And Jesus says to those watching, untie him, unbind him, turn him loose, take off those grave clothes. Some of you have been struggling in these last weeks. Lent has been a journey for us that we did not anticipate. Some of you have come to me and said, I'm troubled. Theology is kicking my hiney. I'm learning things and hearing things that I don't want to believe, and it's challenging everything. But this is a new day, when people are again pulling together as community to discern the presence of God, to discern the power and the interpretation of Scripture. People are coming together, guided by the Holy Spirit, and just as inspired as they were 2,000 years ago. It's exciting and it's frightening. And there's this great compliment that came to us, you and I, on Monday, as I met with my lectionary group and sat with 3 pastors to discuss these texts today. And one pastor looked across the table at me and she said, you know, that's what you're doing at Wiley Christian Church, don't you? You're taking the grave clothes off and you're unbinding people. And all I could say was, thank you. For you, I said, thank you. What do you do? What do you do in the face of death? What do you do in the face of suffering and injustice, or even in the face of justice? Do you take the time to judge it? Or do you shout at it? Come out of there. What do you do? What do you do when a parent abandons you to raise a child alone? Don't you shout into the tomb, come out of there, and take those grave clothes off? And you spend night after night and school year after school year and day jobs and night jobs and part-time jobs, and the years go by and you shout daily into the tomb as you work hard to rear your child alone. What do you do when a child has broken the law and they're called to court and they're convicted, and you know that they're guilty, and you know they're going to be convicted, and they're going to be put on probation, or they're going to be sent to prison, or they're going to be given labels to wear and monitors to wear? What do? But you stand up as a parent in court for that child. Right or wrong, you stand up and you shout into the grave, come out of there. Take off those grave clothes. What do you do when everything fails and falls apart? When your finances crater, when your home burns, what do? You stand up and you shout into the grave, come out of there. Take those grave clothes off. Unbind me. You know, I like that. I get down sometimes. Do y'all do that? I have blue days, man. Carrie used to call them my pity pot days. And she'd say, I'm going to give you one day. You can stay on the pity pot all day. I'll do your laundry. I'll watch your kid for you. But tomorrow, she'd say, I need you back on your feet again. And I look forward to that next day. Because, see, I don't like pity pot days. I hate them. And I stay home and I sulk and I feel sorry for myself. And I think all kinds of bad things about y'all. But... But I look forward to the next day, because the next day I've got this spirit in me that says, ooh, man, I'm going to come back tomorrow, and I'm going to come back not with a vengeance, but with a passion, with a zeal for life. I'm going to come back tomorrow, and I'm going to say, yesterday I was down, but today I'm up. So we determined something yesterday. That particularly as disciples, I can't speak for a lot of folks, but for some of us, there are things that we don't like to do in a worship service, like prayers of the people. My goodness, if you give somebody a microphone and you tell them, come up here and tell us your prayer concerns, we're afraid they're going to stand there and tell us, well, my Aunt Ethel has 10 bunions, one on each toe. And we feel like that's just not really worth praying about, because somebody else is going to come up and talk about cancer. Someone else is going to tell a story that we wish they hadn't told. And the whole thing's going to take so long that the preacher's surely to take his 30 minutes, and then we're going to be late. Not only that, but if we have testimony time, people are going to get up there and talk about things, and I don't want to do that. And because you know what we determined yesterday? That we might have visitors. And visitors might come in here and they might look around and say, ooh, these people are just getting a little too close for comfort. I mean, I came here to feel close to God, sing a few songs, hear the preacher say a nice prayer, and then we'll benedict and we'll go home. Once or twice a year he may make me feel guilty, or she may make me feel guilty, but I'll come back. We'll get through that. The last thing we want is to walk into a place where people are opening themselves up and sharing. And I wondered to myself, where are y'all going to get that now? Who is that circle? Because you're doing that somewhere. You're telling somebody your deepest secrets, your worst fears, and you're sharing with somebody your greatest joys. And then you're tripping over people trying to get out of the church before somebody asks you something. People just want to be heard, don't you? People want to be touched, don't you? Sometimes we have to fall and break our neck before someone will even touch us. Did you know that Peggy McConnell lost her mother last week? And did you know that it had been a long time coming, and that there was actually some celebration and some joy in that day? Maybe you didn't know that. Were you aware that Cinda had broken her leg this week? 2 hospitals didn't know it. It took 3 x-rays. And she told everybody, no, I said it hurts. 2 doctors said, get on it anyway. Did y'all know that? Did you know that Keith Robinson attended a walk to Emmaus 2 weeks ago? And that he was saved? And that he came back and told his pastor that he wanted to get up in front of this church and tell you that he was saved and that he was joining this church? And that he was going to be baptized, and he is going to be baptized on Easter in 2 weeks. Did you know that? Did you know that we're going to be, praise the Lord. See, come on. Did you know that? Did you know that my son's wife is in the Serenity House, and she's been there for almost 3 weeks now, and she's this close to completing the program, only on her second try? How many... Don't raise your hand if you've been through Serenity. I respect. But ask yourself, how many of you did it on your second try? There's a lot going on around here that we're not aware of. There's a lot of tombs to be shouted into. There's a lot of grave clothes to be taken off. And I don't know where you're getting that. But I know that this is a safe place. And I know that whether you ever imagined it or not, everybody here really does care about that. And everybody here is interested in exactly that. And I know that if we're afraid that that kind of intimacy would discourage visitors from coming back to this church, that we may be misguided in that thought? Well, we might find out. I want to invite you right now to pray with me. Remember that we're in the season of Lent and that we're about to move out of Lent. In another 2 weeks, we'll celebrate Easter and resurrection. So let's pray as we come to this yet another Sunday of our journey of wandering through the desert.